We're curbed. I meant, alright, guys, we're curbed up. Alright, today we're playing Kerbal Space Program, a game about exploring, murdering, creating science, and launching Kerbals fast into the surface of planets.
Today we're going to start from nothing and go to every place in the Kerbal system. Today we've loaded the game up with mods, which makes it awful! I'm looking at you, crowd tanks. I hate you! Okay, let's finally start. So, we start out and I make this beautiful rocket for you.
Squidward!
And I fly it. It then flips out of control. We then decouple and then deploy the parachute. And then come in for a landing. We get 11 science and then research some stuff with it. Alright, this is the upper stage that we're going to get into orbit with. And this is the lower stage that's going to bring us into a height where we can activate our upper stage engines. Okay, let's launch.
Alright, orbit achieved. We do some science and then deorbit.
Why would I EVA the Kerbal? That's such a dumb decision. Why would I do that? I have like 1,300 hours in Kerbal Space Program. How?
So I guess, attempt 2. We start a new save, and we, redo it, except we do it better. Wait, why the hell are we in the space plane hangar? Tumble dryer.
Give it up for the tumble dryer.
So, we take Jebediah and Bob, put them in the tumble dryer, and then roll them about, getting some science.
Kaboom!
Well, we start again. Well, we speedrun making the tumble dryer and collect science while doing a bunch of rolling. So a few things I changed since the first one is that I made it so that I could quick save and load a quick save, and I could revert flight, which makes it not hard mode of KSP, but it was still very difficult. Later you'll see I spend a lot of hours.
Alright, we recover the vessel and get a lot of science. Right now we are constructing this beautiful craft that will bring us into orbit. And there we will do lots of science and other things, so that for the next launch we can go to Minmus.
Bob goes out and does a little science.
And we're coming in for a landing. Oh my bazinga, that is a lot of science. We research some stuff, and then we head out. Alright, so this is one of the only times where I'm actually going to explain what I'm building. So right here I'm building the upper stage, which is going to contain our science payload, and going to use high-test peroxide and kerosene as the fuel. I don't want to get into cryogenic fuels, and I'll explain it later, but it's awful. I hate it.
Right here I'm constructing the orbital stage that has a couple of engines that are powerful enough to propel the rocket, and it still uses high-test peroxide and kerosene, but it also has some wings that are far out.
It's aerodynamics, don't worry about it.
Now here's the lower stage comprised of many SRBs to just bring this into the atmosphere so the orbital stage can orbit it.
Alright, launch time. Bob hops out of the command pod, and he waits till sunrise to plant his flag.
All he says is that he's first to Minmus. He starts doing a bunch of science, and goes into his rocket and starts biomining to collect more science. And there we go, a full Minmus landing, with tons of science gathered. We recovered the vessel and get a whopping 1,175 science points.
Man, I just have to say that was a really close call right there. Alright, on to building the Duna rocket.
This is the Ike lander. Its purpose is to land on Ike. It has space for 2 Kerbals, it has some science payload, and it has some high-test peroxide and kerosene for the fuel. It also has a spark engine on the bottom. This is the Duna lander. Its purpose is to land on Duna. Also uses high-test peroxide and kerosene. It also has space for 2 Kerbals. The 2 Kerbals will be Jebediah Kerman and Bob Kerbed, due to Bob being the scientist and Jebediah being the pilot. And it's pretty similar, but this one has parachutes and uses a more industrial command pod. But I mean, look at those legs, they're so weak. It's very difficult to land in. This is the mothership. It has a larger command pod, I think it's the Mark II command pod, and then it also has a bunch of hydrogen and oxygen tanks. But I don't like hydrogen and oxygen, because if you think about it, the gas is inside, but they're liquid.
And to the difficulty of radiating heat in space,
it boils off if you don't insulate it, which is a really big problem. So there's a problem where it just boils off, and so you have to use electricity to insulate it, which is why I slam a bunch of solar panels on this. But this also has 2 asparagus tanks, or 2 lines of tanks with some engines at the bottom. They're all cryogenic, and then they feed into the central stage and decouple when they're out of fuel. So that provides much more delta V, or change in velocity, for this craft. This is the upper stage. The upper stage is used to get the craft into orbit. It uses a few
Skipper
engines to get into orbit, which are very powerful, but they require a special fuel called TBAB to ignite the engine first, due to it can't ignite its engine by itself with just the reaction starts or electricity starts the reaction. They are powerful, but that downside is pretty annoying. Lastly, we have the bottom stage, which is comprised of several SRBs of many variety, and they will use to get the craft up high enough so I can use the orbital stage to get the craft into an orbit.
Alright, the craft is built now. Let's launch to Duna. Alright, now that we're in Duna orbit, I do all the experiments on the Ike lander, which isn't the Duna lander, but still on the Ike lander, get some science. But then I realize I can't restore the Science Junior or the Mystery Goo because I don't have Bob Kerman, who's a scientist. So I make a rocket called the Kerb Switcher and to switch out a Kerbal, and it just really annoyed me that I failed to notice. Well, on the bright side of things, while making this craft, I'm going to seal it in a fairing, and then make the upper stage, which will bring the craft into an orbit with the Bobcat engine, because it's a pretty decent engine, and then encase that in a fairing to make it have a little less drag. And then the bottom stage, I'll bring this craft so that I can use the orbital engines. It's just going to be a big dumb SRB. Alright, now it's time to launch the vehicle. Alright, we EVA Bob Kerman and bring him to the other craft. And then do the same for Bill. Alright, there we go. So much work for just a simple mission to switch out a Kerbal. Alright, let's get back to the mission at hand. Landing on Duna. We come in for the touchdown. And there we go. We finally landed on our first extraterrestrial body. Bob gets out of the command pod and then does a Mars walk and implants a flag. Bob then does a little science and then we lift off. Alright, at the end of that, we got 1,350 science points. A lot, but still less than the Ms. mission, but still, amazing amount for just a simple Duna mission. I have to thank you so much for watching. It's been amazing making this video, and I hope to see you all next time. In the next video, we're going to go to more places, such as Dres and a little bit of the Jewel system. Maybe explore some of our inner planets.
Thank you so much for watching. My name is the Random Jimbo, and I'm out.